Hey, what's up, everybody? Danny Jessup here. I'm joined by Cameron Bodley, and we're here on the Consult ROI podcast. Yet another episode, so we appreciate you guys riding through this with us. Hey, Cameron, how you doing?
I am great. Just got back out of the gym and ready to get this done.
Ready to get going?
Yeah,
Heck
I'm,
yeah.
I'm actually pumped to that because after I got back, me and my buddy and that we've gotten to this like challenge where every single day we'll call each other out. Whoever gets to the gym first,
Oh, there you go.
actually pushing each other to be better and that. And so I'm really appreciative of friends like that where they'll always push you and call you out and like try to get
Yeah,
you to be better, and step up to your potential. So
awesome. No, that's great. Yeah, very cool. It's always good to have an accountability person or partner or friend or anybody in your life there to just kind of keep it going, right? Keep that motor running. So, well,
yeah,
cool. Well, we are talking today. So lately, we've been talking about several different elements of um, kind of running through like just different points of engagement. So um, last week was how to foster, a positive work environment and talking about collaborations and different things there. So speaking of that work environment, today we're going to dive into talking about remote work. It's been top of mind, especially since March 2020, when the world was turned on its side there. And then all of a sudden, this idea of work cannot be done anywhere else except for the office in many aspects of the corporate, lifestyle there. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh, you have a laptop, get the heck out of here and let's figure this thing out remotely. And what was fascinating to me is that as everybody was able to do that, now many companies they were well positioned for that from a corporate standpoint, where most of their employees operated off of laptops. Those that had desktops, all of a sudden, all those computer companies and stuff just went nuts. And I'd love to hear about what that looked like for you if you were kind of in the thick of IT at that time. But then they, scrambled to get laptops for their people, and then we're looking at their colleagues in industries and stuff of what are you guys doing? How are you figuring this out? How are you holding your people accountable? And what was fascinating to me as I lived through that entire thing is that people were so nervous about their jobs, not to say that I wasn't, but they were so nervous about their jobs that productivity like went through the roof. Okay, I'm at home. I got to be busy. I got to be proactive. I got to show that I'm doing something, even though I'm remote. So I don't have my manager, big brother, whatever you want to call it, looking over my shoulder. And so the productivity went up. And now it seems that we're kind of getting into this environment over the past year of people go like, hey, you going back in the office? If you are, how often is that going to be? Is that frequent? And then how are you still maintaining that? What does your productivity look like? And if it started to dip, we got to get everybody back in the office there to kind of get that camaraderie going so people can learn from osmosis from one another and kind of like really build that out. So it's been this roller coaster legit. But real quick, as we dive into this, what did that look like for you about March of 2020?
March of 2020 had almost 80 million of contracts lined up. So we were doing a lot of build outs for a lot of larger franchise chains and stuff. So March comes around, they shut things down, and it was, as you remember back then, it was supposed to be 2 weeks, right?
Yeah, and by the way, when the Utah Jazz broke the NBA, it was exactly that time frame. If anybody's trying to position what that was when the Utah Jazz went to Oklahoma and ruined the NBA. But go on. I was at the game in Utah that Monday night before that Wednesday that they ruined the NBA, and I was there like 50 rows up on the like top row of the lower bowl at the Delta Center. And we had people from Virginia out of, in town that we were hosting. We took them to dinner. We were all having a great time. We're introducing them to some Utah local favorites and stuff that they're serving at the Delta Center. And then all of a sudden, a couple days later, the Jazz break the NBA. But I apologize. I just to give everybody a point of reference if you're trying to remember what exactly those dates were. But go ahead.
Yeah. So it was going to be a great year. It was actually going to be the record breaking, and that it was 2020. It was like one of those numeric numbers, and everybody thought it either like it was going to be the year of change, and like it was going to be one of those years that I was able to pay off my house. Obviously, a lot of those things, and that because all the retail establishments and everything, I got to see both sides of it. So there was companies, there are certain chains that were able to pivot very effectively, that were also not as concerned with kind of the fear mongering that was going on at that time. Not to say that it wasn't like a real disease. I'm just saying that there was definitely a lot of other stuff that we don't really need to get into right now.
Sure.
And so I did see the ones that pivoted and everything, they did very, very well. Chili's was one of those. Chili's did exceptionally well, because their to-go orders, almost every single day as a standard, was higher than their peak Saturday hours.
Wow.
And he even told me, he's like, we've actually had to hire more people on, and we've been more busy than we've ever been before.
Even busier than when Chili's 2 was featured in The Office for their work parties. No, I'm just kidding. Side joke
there. So it was one of those things that it showed that people did not want to cook, right? They didn't want to deal with a lot of those on and end things, and they didn't want to. It was the same reason that during the first part of it, everything sales wise plummeted, right? And then RV sales skyrocketed back up. So it was one of those things that, based on where you were, what industry and everything else, it adjusted to pivot. But kind of relating back to the topic, really, the biggest thing, both with culture, both with revenue, both with everything else, is how quickly people were able to pivot. For me personally, I was frankly in denial for a long time, and that I was still
like in
deemed
what way?
I didn't think that anybody would that people had enough common sense to understand that shutting down the economy for that long would have very drastic, dire effects, which people have snowballed and inflated with debt, which is the whole point of the EIDL loan and a lot of those emergency preparedness basically they inflated everybody with massive amounts of debt, which is why still people to this day are still feeling the effects. I still have some of that debt and everything, frankly.
And all those people that deferred their house payments and stuff like that, now it's coming due. Like, I don't know if it has or hasn't yet, but it's like right about now, right? And so now they're like, hey, all that money that you deferred, we want it. Oh, and by the way, we want it in full. Is that right? That's what I've heard.
Yeah, I mean, if you didn't go through the proper paperwork, and there was a lot of like fine print and everything that people had to be careful of, or you'd get really in a bad pickle. Fact is, I mean, literally, if you look at overnight, the government got invested interest in literally all the equity of how many business owners, all in less than a 3 to 8 month period of time. Yeah. So right now, if I don't pay on that EIDL loan, even though it wasn't my actions that caused it or anything else, they can still come in and take my house and sell it, right? And then basically take their equity out of it, give me whatever remains. And even at a fire sale or auction or whatever else, which shows that you don't have that freedom anymore or luxury of doing that, which is also why I'm a big believer in financial discipline and all of those other things. That's another topic that we could go in a whole other episode on.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things there that is unfortunate. But yeah, that was the main reason I was in denial. And that is, frankly, I didn't think that anybody would. I thought most people had enough common sense to understand that if you shut things down like that, it not only makes or perpetuates the situation or makes things worse, but it's going to leave substantially more mental impacts, physical impacts, everything else. Nobody would believe me for a while and everything. If you even look at a lot of my posts, I was calling it out from day one. And of course, people are like, "Oh, you just don't care about other people," blah blah blah. And I'm like, no, it's not about that. It's like if you're sick, if you have compromised immune system, whatever else, yeah, like
Take care of yourself. Yeah.
yeah, I say do what you need to build your immune system. The fact is most of these people are drinking excessive amounts of coffee, eating junk food, are obese. They've never cared about their health in the first place, so of course it's going to have drastically more effects on that. And that's the reality. It's like we shouldn't need a virus to remind us that, oh, hey, this is why we should be healthy. This is why we should be taking care of ourselves and everything else.
Yeah, I mean, along those lines, just yesterday, riding mountain bikes with the mountain bike team, um, someone had an event on Sunday where their son was welcomed home and things. And so that ride leader, a mom that was in my ride group, I had crashed their party and stuff, and we had some great treats and everything. And she says, "Oh boy, today's ride has really made me rethink and a little bit regret all the good food we had yesterday." And so, I mean, I don't think it takes a pandemic to help people realize that they should eat healthier. But it was just a small comment like that. And this isn't someone that probably is overly, excessively like eating, the wrong ways that she needs in her life. But it was just a good comment. And it's almost like, you know what? Go on one mountain bike ride that has some uphill climb in it and think about the decisions you're making about what you're putting in your body. Or think about decisions that you're making of the lack of working out or moving and stuff like that, right? That's all it takes is just that, not necessarily a pandemic required, right?
Well, there's a reason that most people, as soon as they do one intensive weight training, that they just feel like, you know what, forget this, it's not worth it.
Right.
I'd rather be happy with food. It's the mentality of a lot of people, which is the same thing that plays into culture here. So this is talking about remote work culture and everything else. And it's very easy to get into that mentality, and that especially for remote workforce or employees, is like, hey, I'm just going to do what's easiest. I mean, how many things can you find online right now where it shows like, hey, they would, because they had some corporations that would literally put activity trackers on people's computers, so
Right.
it actually see who was moving their mouse and keyboard, and based on that, it would determine their activity level or what they were doing. And so they would build little robots or mouse jigglers or other things to try to get around that so they could go off and do whatever they wanted to more so. So in some cases, some companies' productivity went up, especially if they had the right culture in place, the right accountability measures, and other things in place, right? But on the flip side, the other one is not. And I've seen both, and I've also been both. I've been in companies too where it was very hard to keep myself accountable, or my staff, because I felt like I was babysitting them, and I felt like I was the big brother, always like micromanaging everything, which I hated. I hated that feeling. I didn't like that. And so I was just like, hey, I trust you, get your stuff done.
Yeah.
And then nothing would get done, and I'd wonder why. Right. And then I would try to do another training, and they would start off maybe well for the first little bit, and then productivity, tickets, everything else would plummet again.
Yeah.
Especially on sales side. Sales side is more so. And technical side, it's very much more task oriented. So it's either you got the job done or you didn't.
Yeah.
Kind of
You've
like
got all these tasks lined up.
the car, or you didn't fix it. Like there's not a lot of middle ground there.
Yep.
So same type of mentality there, and that's why it's easier in those type of things where it's like piece rate or work rate to kind of foster that. Just like, hey, look, either I don't care, like as long as you're meeting these metrics and that, do whatever the heck you want, right?
Yeah. Yep. So then, because of that, like that remote work actually provided a lot of people flexibility that they've never had before. I'm a producer. I'm going to cover the things that I need to, but if I'm going to like go and sit on the, the front steps with my kid for a minute, or, go walk the dog around the block for a moment, as to normally I'd have to spend 9 hours away from home minimum plus traffic, because I went into the office. Now I have that luxury here and I'm producing. I can afford that time to go walk the dog for a moment for a quick break, as opposed to standing around the water cooler in the office and just literally just standing around, still having
Yeah, your
quality
mental
conversation.
variation actually with instances, especially if you have the self-discipline to be able to step out and do something positive or constructive, right? So
Yeah,
if you can foster that culture and everything, which is people that care about bettering themselves, that really is what it comes down to. I mean, if you're listening to this, it's people that are like you that are listening to this type of stuff that you really want in your company, not necessarily people that are just listening, but people that are hearing and taking action on some of these things to better their own lives. And it is absolutely like I saw both kind of sides. I don't know if you remember, but there was all these publicities going off initially too, where it says, hey, because everyone's called home, the domestic violence rates went up through the roof, because they were like they didn't have a break from their spouse.
yeah.
Like,
I mean, not that our
really-
domestic violence went up in our home. However, my wife did say, "You are really messing with the way that I run this house during the day. You being here, and now the kids have two adults in here trying to manage the chaos. She runs the house the way she runs the house during the day, and my coming in here, she really thought that I would actually be the one to struggle because I enjoy the people aspect and working with people and things. But I've actually come to love working from home. But it definitely caused a disruption within our home because of my presence here that wasn't normally a regular occurrence during the day.
No, I get that. It's like even for me though, it was a substantial. It was a struggle. Even when I first started working from home, um, because when I was home, essentially, like the mentality is like, okay, you can help me do all these other things. Oh, you can do the kid care, you can do the help with meals, you can help clean, do all these other things that actually detracted and made my productivity like plummet.
Sure.
Um,
You're
because
like, here,
every
you're
single
here, you're going to share in the load, right?
yeah, so every 2 seconds, like I was constantly getting interrupted. I was constantly having to try to refocus and that. And so I was constantly busy doing all these different tasks, but I felt like I wasn't accomplishing anything.
Yeah.
And so it was so aggravating for me personally in the situation because I didn't necessarily have a respected private space, if you will.
Sure.
And that can be very difficult, right? And
Yeah.
so,
Which most
especially if
people
you have
didn't.
employees that are doing that, right? If you have, like, even right now, I've had 5 kids run in and out of the house, like no less than 12 times, which kind of derails, and it's frustrating because they don't like it's interesting because you have they don't need you until you like need that separation. Um, and then all of a sudden, like every fire breaks loose, and even the simplest minute thing
Yeah.
is a huge fire, right? That needs to be put out. Um, but I mean, it is what it is, and it's. I still need to teach some of these lessons, like, hey, this is part of like respect to that. When Dad is doing this, like, I need my space, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Especially when we're getting Amazon Prime same day within a few hours. You know what I mean? And like, it's like they see it, they wanted to like it, I get it. And it's just like this culture of access to everything, including.
the instant gratification culture has always been the reason that society is perpetually getting or going to hell in a handbasket. Because the reality is nothing good ever comes instantly. Not one thing. Um, and people will try to challenge that, but I'm saying if you want something that's long term, that is successful, that provides you long term joy, that does anything, whether that is a successful business or a healthy body or again, a great marriage or anything else, all of those things require a substantial amount of work, dedication, and consistency.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, a byproduct benefit to that of, I mean, my kids are the same way. It's like they see that my door is closed right here. Like I'm fortunate to have a separate kind of home office. Dumb luck, by the way, that we built our house 19 years ago. We've got this front visiting room here that I put French doors on. And so for me, it was easy to basically come home and have a workspace. But my family knows that if the door's closed and I've got the headset on here, I'm live with somebody doing something, be it recording or a meeting or whatever it is. And so a byproduct benefit of that is, I guess what I'm saying is that like it's teaching them a little bit of patience and that respect that you were talking about earlier.
And obviously kids, especially toddlers, in that you can tell them the same thing 20 times and it doesn't change.
Right.
But it is what it is, right? And so it does come through consistency, and it does come through being able to set that boundary and that expectation and on that understanding to where they are actually seeing the consequences of that. But because from their perspective, they only see like, oh, hey, she's just busy, he doesn't have time for us type deal, which is not the case, right? It's
Right.
hey,
Exactly.
I need to prioritize, I need to get this done in order for us to be able to do all the other fun things, whether it's vacations, trips, or even simple things like going bowling, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Groceries or just keeping the lights on or whatever. Like you've got to do that little bit of sacrifice for those other benefits that you're talking about, for sure.
yeah, but again, everybody wants the best of both worlds, and that's the problem with a lot of things. So the only way that you can really instill that culture, both in your home and in that, is teaching the value of hard work and teaching the value of that. It's not. So I also used to make this mistake where anybody would do like the bare minimum, and I would give them all this praise, and I'd give them all these things, and I'd be like, oh, great job getting this done, and that great things. But I looked at that, and I started realizing that I was rewarding them for meeting baseline, like the literally absolute baseline. I wasn't rewarding or excelling the people that were exceeding that anymore, right? It was the same kind of level. As soon as they met the baseline, or even if they made efforts to try to get to the baseline, I'd be like, hey, no, great job. And I appreciate you making the effort, getting this stuff done. And I realized that that was actually enabling idle hands, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
they are already getting the hormone or the pheromones to say, okay, hey, I'm getting this done. I'm good and everything. I don't need to do any more. And that led to a downfall that it took me a long time to actually try to recover or rebuild from. Because I just felt, I was like, okay, maybe if I give them positive affirmation, maybe if I do this, maybe if I treat them and just shoot unicorns and rainbows up their butt all the time, like they'll just be happy and dancing and everything will be great and merry. That's not the way it works. So
Right.
doesn't matter again if it's in culture, remote or in person. The reality is that you kind of need to have those meetings and that, but there's that fine line between. So I've gone into this before and everything where controlling and leaders, or controlling and manipulating and leadership, is pretty much almost the same energy, right? But one is very toxic and
Yep.
negative, and one is positive. The only difference between the two is one is trying to control or manipulate for personal gain, whereas leadership is trying to collectively, as a whole, build everyone up together, right? So it's the same concept, even with employees in a day-to-day. How can you build them up and everything without being condescending or shoving them down or anything else, right? Because you can, like, for example, if I only praise the absolute top performer, then yeah, people try to step up their game to try to get that praise, right? Because they're not really
Yeah.
necessarily getting that. but it doesn't mean you be a disrespectful jerk
Yeah,
to
to
all the
everybody
other guys.
else. You guys
And
all suck. This person, why can't you be more like, yeah, that's not going to work.
that comparison, that is the toxic in that culture. That is kind of the Achilles heel. Is as soon as you start doing the comparison, it's as soon as you start doing that. It's the same thing with kids, frankly. As soon as I start saying, like, why can't you be more like your sibling? Do you see your sibling? Do you see how they're behaving? Blah, blah, blah. No. Like, so I found that it works substantially better if you just be like, hey, I'll ignore their behavior. I won't even give them, because whether it's negative or positive engagement or attention, it still hits the same pheromones. And so if they see themselves in acting in negative reactions or negative attention, and that they'll still strive for that, which gets more of what you don't want. So as you change that and just shift it just slightly, and that where it says, like, for example, if my kid's throwing a tantrum, I just, like, the most acknowledgement I will give it now is like, hey, do you need some alone time? Do you need to go chill in your room and take a breather? Okay, if you're going to continue to hit, or if you're going to continue to do these things, or you're going to continue to be destructive and you're not listening, then I'm going to be like, you're going to be put in your room. But that's the most acknowledgement and everything. But I'm not going to allow this any further. But it doesn't engage past that point. It's a simple, like, clear line saying, this is what's going to happen if you don't do this, or you can, like, do it yourself and hold yourself accountable to get yourself into a better mindset, right? Or take a breather, or beat a pillow, or whatever they need to do to get that out of that toxic energy out of their system and come back and a lot better person, or show up how we know you can.
Well, let's tie that into the remote work aspects as well, right? So, I mean, for the most part, I think that, like, people, you know, play nice in the sandbox when you're talking about coworkers and stuff like that, right? Like, you don't want to be in a toxic culture, and sometimes they are toxic. I mean, absolutely. I think we've all experienced
I've
those
also
in the
worked in
workplace.
both of those, and like very much the car salesman culture ship, which is again that toxic, because it was very much the comparison. It was very much the other stuff. Like, the competition isn't bad. It's all the other toxic crap and lack of support or lack of care for everybody but the top person. That's where it becomes negative. And so how it ties back, even with this, is like so if you have remote staff, right, you need to hold them to the same standard you would your other people, right?
Right. Yeah. Consistency across the board, equal opportunity, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, that's kind of a standard given, right?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, just treat them the same way across the board, universally, and that, like, obviously favoritism is again, one of the other Achilles heels of most cultures, and that, because they'll start creating their own groups, and the bigger a company is, the harder it is to avoid that, because they'll naturally kind of formulate that. But if you did a good job at hiring in the first place, and also who's doing remote staff and everything else, then you also know that when you come together, you guys are all friends, right? You're all there to build each other up. You're all there to collaborate and everything. And that's really the differentiator on how can you keep your staff remote or not? It comes down to how good of a leader are you to ensure accountability, consistency, and making sure that they don't fall through the cracks. Because the more, like, if you can't get everybody to do and hold everyone accountable to do these, like, web meetings, right? So to jump on a meeting like this, to have conversations, to do that things, and you start noticing a lot of staff will make excuses, they don't show up or anything else, and you don't hold them accountable.
Yeah, that's a leadership, right?
It'll deteriorate massively. The productivity goes down, everything else goes down, because people recognize that. It's the same thing. Again, I compare a lot of these things to what I used to, it's personal life, because these are, again, universal truths.
Yes.
So it's the same thing with my parents. Is I knew anytime that they grounded me, regardless of what it was, that I could out endure them, or make it so inconvenient for them to be consistent on that discipline, that they might stick with it for a couple hours, at most a day.
Yeah. And I mean, as a parent that's experienced that, it's a a battle of wits and how long you're going to withstand that. Like, it's tough. It is.
Well, it's the same reason in the war in Taiwan in that, or Vietnam. So in the Vietnam in that, it says like the whole slogan is like, we're gonna knock this war out in a week, or Russia and everything will be done, and we're gonna win this war, get home. And all the Vietnamese people says we will endure. So the people that would say we will endure will always win. That's why we got our butts handed to us in the first place. It's the same reason my parents got out, like their butts handed to them on that sense. Because of the fact that I knew that they wouldn't keep consistent with it. I knew that they wouldn't hold themselves, that they weren't their word. And so because of that, like, it didn't matter if it was bad or good for that matter. Okay.
Sure.
So this might be a little too personal, but that was the reality. Is I knew if they promised something good, 99% of the time, it never happened. Like,
so it's almost like,
like,
hey, we'll go get ice cream if you do this, right? Like,
I
kind of
would
thing,
do
right?
that, and I wouldn't get the ice cream, right?
But
Or
then at the same time, you're going to be grounded for, in today's terms, I'm going to take that iPad away for 2 hours or for a week. I'll take that away for a week if you keep doing that. And yeah, by the next day, you've got it in your hands, right? Or the equivalent to that back then.
yeah, back then we were still on the original Game Boy,
I was
but
going to say,
and I was lucky to even get my hands on one of those type deal. Heck, the fact that I still remember going out sneaking, building all the funds and that, and buying the first original Xbox and everything, and then of course my parents would take that, even though I had worked for it, I had put in the effort and everything else, and so for me, like, so how this applies again, it's the same thing in leadership, as a parent, leadership in a company and everything. If you don't have consistency, and if you don't keep your word, you lose all respect. You lose all control. You lose your position as basically the patriarch of both your home or your business, right?
yeah, and that's whether you're in a corporate environment or rolling solo, on an entrepreneurial side, right? I mean, it's consistency
If you
across
don't
the
hold
board.
yourself accountable to yourself, how the heck do you expect, like, if you can't even keep your own promises to yourself and everything? Because how many times, I guarantee, if some of you said, oh, hey, I will start this workout tomorrow. Oh, hey, I'm going to do this tomorrow. Oh, hey, I'll get this done this week. And that time comes and goes, and then it just goes by the wayside. So you yourself, even your subconscious, if you don't keep your word to yourself, how the heck do you expect anybody else to believe you? You don't even believe in yourself.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Don't go chasing waterfalls. Believe in yourself. The rest is up to me and you. It's like,
Well, it's
so
the
true,
same
though.
thing. You don't
You
have to
got it.
hold yourself to some ridiculous standard. Like, for example, don't ever, like, this is the same thing with my kids, is I have to be very careful about what punishments or rewards that I'm going to promise, because I have to make sure that I follow through on that, regardless of what they do. Even if I say, hey, if you do the dishes, I'll give you ice cream. It doesn't matter if they do something else, because at that point they still did the task, and you can't just take it away because of something else and everything. So that kind of shows a hypocrisy, right? And so people will be like, oh, well, I'm going to lose it for something else stupid anyways. So it creates that
Trust. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's a dilution of trust in that, dilution in both, pretty much everything. But again, this is something that it's paramount, where you have to keep, and I understand, like just do something small. Like, if you don't, like, the hardest person to build trust with is frankly yourself, right? It's the same. It's the reason that so many people procrastinate. It's the reason so many people struggle to accomplish what they want because they don't have faith in themselves, and they don't have accountability with themselves, and they don't have pretty much anything. Like, and it really does start off with you. This is what people don't understand. If you really want to be successful, if you really want to do this, it starts with you and holding yourself to a specific standard in specific thing, saying, okay, hey, if I do this, I will do this.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And
You've
as you
got
do
to.
that, you show other people and be like, hey, yeah, he's getting these results. He's doing this. He's holding himself to the same standard he's holding us. Right.
Yeah.
And
And
that
it's,
should go
yeah,
ahead.
and it's that, and it's you mentioned it earlier, it's the boundaries, right? You've got a boundary for yourself of what you will or won't do, and that's going to bleed into other areas, and it's all about those boundaries, and that's therefore you're holding yourself accountable for the boundaries that you've set and things
And
there
if
too.
your
So
managers don't do it, it's not just you. If your managers do not do this, if they don't hold themselves to this accountability, this standard, and everything, that is what's going to create extreme toxicity and negativity in your culture.
yep,
And
and
I
no
don't
one can
care
count
how
on it.
great of a performer they are in certain regards. If they don't hold themselves universally to this certain standard, and then like, hey, if they mess up or don't deliver on it, and they be like, hey, you know what, my bad. This is what I'm going to do to fix it or rectify it moving forward. If they don't do that, that's somebody that doesn't have accountability or respect. And it might be because either in themselves, they're like, well, I don't care because I succeed in this job and I'm not going to get rewards for it anyways, right? Or I do this and I don't care. Nobody's going to hold me accountable for not doing my job, right? There's a lot of different aspects in that. It's the same thing with remote work. Is like, well, if I don't have anybody holding me accountable and I'm not getting rewarded for doing this extra work, what's the frick is the incentive?
Yeah, what's the point? And part of that to me, a lot of times, like the extra things that I do, it's just like it's holding me myself accountable. It's I feel like it's also related to my integrity of sometimes it's just the right thing to do. It's not in a job description or something, but it's probably the right thing to do. And then the other thing that I take as a proactive approach is, hey, you know what? I'm actually educating myself on something that isn't necessarily in my job description, but could actually help me be better at my job. I might be able to speak better to something because of a byproduct of something else that I'm doing that's not within my typical boundary, I don't want to say boundaries, but my job description. But how do I go above and beyond, in that? And at the same time, with that remote work, it is actually you're not there kind of turning the wrench, so to speak, in front of a manager who's physically watching you or observing you. They're just kind of seeing the performance of the numbers and how that shakes out. And so it's also kind of covering my bases of like, hey, I'm going above and beyond and doing these things, and you're hearing about it from other people. So now I've actually got third party people giving me pats on the back and these attaboys
Yeah,
going,
validation.
yeah, absolutely. And it's not coming from me. So I don't have to be the one to be like, hey boss, look how great I am. Look at me. I've got plenty of other people that'll do that for me when I do what I say I'm going to do, go above and beyond. But you don't even have to go above and beyond. These days, just showing up and doing what you're saying you're going to do is actually perceived as above and beyond, is it not? Like it really
It's
is, because
really
so many
kind of
people don't.
pathetic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And well, it's the same thing. Like take in consideration if at whether it was with me or your other or any employer in general, right? Um, if you had if you were consistently meeting above and beyond, right? But you received no validation, you received no anything, and then you had a week where you pretty much did jack and nothing else happened negative too. Do you think that you would still continue to have the same work ethic and that for very long before just being burnt out, having that loss and everything, and then quickly seeking outside opportunities where you do have that validation, or just basically going to the discontent and everything if we really don't hold ourselves accountable, right? Is where
Yeah.
we let it deteriorate to the point where we just become something that we're not proud of at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that old adage, people don't leave bad companies, they leave bad bosses, right? And so it's like, I'm not feeling valued, appreciated, or anything here. I'm not getting any, any attaboys, or like I don't even really necessarily like do anything for the attaboys, but
affirmation.
yeah, exactly, even support of that too, absolutely. But yeah, if you're not feeling like that's being reciprocated in certain ways, yeah, it's only so long until you're like, oh, you know what, some spam list got my information and they're kind of messaging me about all these different job boards and stuff like that. I wonder what does the grass look like over there? And trust me, I've tried different grass, and what I've found, it's not necessarily greener. It's always just different grass. I might have Kentucky bluegrass over here and a different form of grass over there. It's always just different grass. Never typically greener. That's been my experience, at least.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've worked with a lot of bigger companies though too. And that is where it's very hard not to be kind of one of the numbers, right? Which is where everything's kind of the same thing, different breed, if you will.
Sure.
And I definitely see where that would feel like the same, and that because obviously with smaller companies, it can be drastically different, right? You can have owners, because you're basically directly dealing with the owner 24/7, and it's such a small niche group. Like basically, bigger the company, the higher stability things
Yep,
are.
absolutely.
Because you can be more selective on who you associate with that company, what you do, how do you, and then kind of use those different associations to justify being there. I remember staying in a job before, and that where there was literally only one guy that I could stand. Everybody else there was by far, like, I just saw as absolute garbage, waste of space, and that just not great people, horrific in fact. But that one person convinced me to stay a heck of a lot longer than I probably should have.
Yeah.
And they're still a friend to this day, and
Yeah.
that's by far the highest caliber person. The most, like, they are by far one of the best human beings that I've had the pleasure of knowing.
Oh,
And
that's
that's
awesome.
besides yourself and everything
Oh,
too.
dude.
But that's the reality. Is like, I look for these connections, and I will endure a lot of things for some of those connections. But the reality is that only goes so much. And when you have such a small niche company, like, right, 5 people in the company total, it's drastically different, because you're not going to. If you burn the bridge with a small dose, it's a lot easier to leave. It's a lot easier to move on. It's a lot easier to just get on, because you just think that that's the whole thing, as opposed to just a certain part or certain department,
Yeah.
or something to that effect. And so that's where that preface is. So it's, again, same thing with remote work. Just to summarize this and cap this and nip this in the butt for the final
Wind
time,
it down. Yeah.
is you have to have accountability metrics in place, and that both from a discipline and accountability metrics and that performance metrics, as well as reward, right? There has to be incentives on both sides of the table. And that's the reason that a lot of people are calling people in. Because when it is remote, and that, it's a lot harder to get somebody also on a phone call than it is to walk down to their office. So there is
Yeah,
certain
exactly.
benefits like that. And I do see the benefits significantly of having your own space, where you kind of are just around other people that are working. You're just around other people that are fulfilling or executing on a task. So that's where I frankly thrive a little bit better, because I don't necessarily have those distractions. It's easy for me to put away my phone and just take out the work phone or the desk phone, because I know that no personal calls are going to come in on that number. So it keeps me 100% focused in the game the whole time.
Do a lot of deep work that way, for sure.
Exactly. So you have to figure out and realize which person you are. Like, I'm one of those people that I will hyper focus, and I will literally disappear into a cave den for 78 plus hours, no eating, drinking, nothing, focus until the task is done. But that is me, and I understand it. And some people are like, "Oh yeah, that's insane, it's stupid, or whatever else." Well, that might be, but that's who I am. That's what I know. I like how my brain works. I
Yeah.
would focus until the task is done.
Yeah,
Like,
and sometimes, yeah, that could even be like, got to be careful with that. Could be detrimental too, of not taking care of yourself along the way. But I get your point there of like you're
it
dialed
is.
in and you're ready to you're hammering that out. That actually kind of reminds me of if you've ever read Driven by Larry H. Miller, the late owner of the Utah Jazz and all these car dealerships here in Utah. In his book Driven, he built the Delta Center, and fascinating to him, and back at the time, was this the late 80s or whatever when he started this, is that he even did so much research and micromanaged so much of the project that he said he would leave his house with the Snickers bar on the back seat at 5 a.m. and he'd get back at 11 o'clock at night with that same Snickers bar sitting there. And then he attributes a lot of the detriment to his health because he was so focused, even to picking out the trees out in the common and walkway areas around the plaza of the Delta Center. And he's like, you know what? I could have delegated that out. But he was just so laser focused, but then, came at a cost later on and things there. So you've got to take care of yourself along the way, despite
it
the focus
always
too.
comes at a cost. But the reality is if you don't have some of that, you get distracted. I know for me, like I will intentionally try to take breaks and that. So even like this for me is frankly kind of in a sense more of a therapeutic break.
Sure.
But
Because there's a million things you could be doing right now. That I guarantee you, that I know for a fact. There's 100 things going on the other side of the screen right now. You're like, it's they're brewing and they're stewing, and then you just got to get them handled and stuff. But no, I appreciate you taking the time out for all these podcasts as well. So I enjoy it as well. It is a great conversation piece and therapeutic as well for me too. So it's awesome.
for me, it's definitely it is the therapy in the sense I will try to like I'll be able to step away, refocus, and I finally have built up enough mental discipline where I can block out and focus on really in the intent of the question and serving other people, right? So I'll step in 100% on that, and it might take me again, 10, 15 minutes to refocus on all the other tasks. Like right now, it's doing my own mind map. I have to look at all these tasks and everything, map them out, figure out what the priority is. Okay, this is required to get this done. This is required to get this done. This is required to get this done. Okay, what is the keystone task I need to focus on? Again, if you haven't listened to that episode, go back. Yeah. But that is what I execute consistently on, not just on a big picture thing, but on even day to day or week. And that is like, hey, what do I need to get accomplished this week? What do I actually need to try to get done? And then I will reward myself based on the tasks and that. And I will make sure like, okay, as long as I'm productive like this, I can make sure that I am going to be able to designate and give my family the priority or time and that. So I hold myself to those metrics and that to make sure.
That's great.
And it's very easy, especially if, there's conflict or anything else. It's very easy to try or want to disregard some of that, if you will. But at the end of the day, you have to hold yourself to whatever you promise in that, good or bad, and that because long term it will pay out. It's the same reason that if you have a disagreement with somebody, and that do you really want to have that like that simple conversation or debate ruin entire like years long friendship?
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, absolutely not.
Yeah, and I will have people do that to me all the time though, because we have one disagreement, whether it's like pro-life, pro-choice, or something as simple as like, hey, I felt like you were being kind of a hypocrite here, and that it doesn't like you can be offended by that, right? But I don't like as you might know me a little bit better than some people, but if I say something like that, it's not me trying to be a condescending jerk. It's me pointing out, saying like, hey, I have a problem with this. I want you to know exactly where I stand on it, and also give you the opportunity to like step up or that, or maybe re-explain it or something else, because I don't like that or being associated with that, right? Because I'm not going to be around near a bunch of hypocrites or anything else. And I want to see that person step into the true potential of the person that I know that they're capable of being.
And
So
sometimes that's tough for them to hear, and they'll accept that in a way of offense rather than constructive. Is that right?
absolutely, and it's very much even the same thing with employees in that, that can play into that, because I'm very blunt. I was like, hey, you said you were going to do this, you didn't do this. What are we going to do from here? Are you either going to step up and take accountability, or are you going to back out? And if they're having a bad day, then usually they'll always, they'll let that one deal, instead of being like, you know what, I have some things going on, but this is what I'm going to do to rectify that, to address that, to be better and step up. Or like, hey, I need my personal time to step away, get my head clean, or whatever else. Like, I just had a death in the family, like I did, or whatever. I get it, but take accountability in whatever it is and say what you're going to do to try to address it and move forward with your life.
Yeah, and communicate, right? Like,
Yeah.
you've got to communicate, and that all relates back to the remote work side of things, of like being an effective communicator, because now we're less and less FaceTime like this. So now I've got to figure out how to be an excellent communicator, and to be able to leverage the tools that I have. But I think the success at remote work, if I was to kind of like summarize what we've talked about here today too, is it starts with you. It really does. And if you don't feel like you are up to
All of
par,
these lessons, if you look at it, it does start with you. It really does, from the employee standpoint and the employer, right? You hold yourself accountable and you go where you're going to be striving or held to a specific standard, because like, again, even with simple little things, like I love some of my guys and everything, because they will literally, whether it's my buddy that's pushing me and saying, hey, gym time, calling you out, get this done, like get your workout in today, right? Or it's one of my employees that were like, hey, be sure to, like, you said you were going to get this done today, I need this done, and that calling you out to get this done. I'm like, thank you, like I appreciate you giving me that reminder. I'll make sure that happens, right? And I'm going to hold myself to that standard. And when I deliver on that, that's what really builds that rapport and allows people to do that. I mean, how many times have you even helped me accountable and everything, where you're like, hey, are we doing this podcast? And I'm like, oh shit, like I was in the middle of like 10 other things, lost track of time. You know what? I appreciate you like calling me out. Let's get on it, right?
Jumping in. Heck yeah. So, it's being, starting with you, and living and dying by a schedule sometimes, and holding yourselves accountable. So that's been a great conversation overall. I hope that those of you listening here today have taken some away. Some of the things that, mean a lot to us is if you are liking, commenting, sharing this with someone in your network, or even, comment below of what this looks like for you. What does accountability, how have you succeeded in remote work, or how have you saw this train wreck happen, and what are some lessons that you've taken from this whole new remote work environment that we've experienced?
All right, guys, we appreciate you again. And he said, we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. If you would like to see any other topics or anything, be sure to either email us, which is, you can actually just use our work one, which is connect@competav.com, or danny@dannysentme.com. That one is either one. If you have questions, concerns, or anything else, you can message me or hit Danny here, and we'd be happy to go through them and see where we can benefit you or pour more value into you. Again, for the next couple episodes, we're still going to do like how we can be a better employer and employee, regardless of where our situation is, and anything from culture to remote work to anything else. Like for me with remote work, I have to, again, create that solid space. I have to mind map, and I have to hold myself accountable, and then create that routine. because if I don't have that routine or schedule and that, things fall apart for me. So figure out what that is for you and then go from there. But anyways, again, appreciate you guys, and we will catch you on the next podcast.
Peace.